Thank you, Scoby Roshi. Thank you all for making time for and commitment to this 90-day practice period, making time to gather in this evening or this morning, whatever time zone you are in. And I understand we're recording this, the sneaky work of habits. This is our first week of this 90-day period. And if we're trying something new, some new habit we're trying out for size or new practice, it's still a very tender shoot. It's not well established yet, right? So still very tender. You might still feel a little uncomfortable or a little bit odd. I want to talk about kind of our conventional way of looking at habits and then dig a little deeper into what's really going on. And my hope for you is that it helps you frame up a habit of mind you'd like to work on, or maybe the one you were already chosen to work on, something that I say refreshes this time for you. That's a phrase that comes to mind. We call this the habit of freedom. And I think back to the line we attribute to Mori Sogen Roshi, who in addition to being a great Zen master, was also a master of sword and calligraphy. And he had practiced this branch of Kendo called Hojo, these different patterns that manifest different energies in the human being. And it was said of that, it was that the purpose of Hojo was to take away every habit from the day you were born. And when I heard that, I thought like, wow, that's a lot of habits, since the day I was born. What's wrong with my habits? I like brushing my teeth this way, or I like these foods, or I walk a certain way. What's wrong with habit? And then on the other hand, we have people like Benjamin Franklin saying, the key to a good life is good habit, right? Having virtuous habits, good habits. And we know from a learning point of view that, especially if you've trained in something physically, like a sport or a martial art that you're really mastering, that there's a kind of way where habit just gets into your bones, where you go from something being like a conscious practice, where we say you're building conscious competence, to a place where you build unconscious confidence. It just comes out, right? Muscle memory, we might call it. Well, it's a habit. And we consider that sometimes a sense of mastery. So what are they, good or bad, right? When do habits get us in trouble? When do they set us free? Something I really invite you to explore in these 90 days and come to your own answers and use these talks and ideas to kind of triangulate on your own experience. So as I said, I'd like to start with talking about our sort of conventional understanding of habits and how habits are built in the nervous system, kind of a neuroscience view of it, but then go a little deeper into what's really so sneaky about how habits work. We know habits are built through repetition. They're built through repeated signaling in the nervous system that strengthens the connections between cells. We know that it takes a while for habits to build through repetition. It doesn't happen like this. There's a phrase that is attributed to the great neuroscientist Gerald Edelman, who says, what fires together, wires together. So part of, and I'll go back to Mori Sogen's comment of taking away habits since the day you were born. One question that lodged in me, maybe it lodges in you too, is like, what was so special about the day I was born? Like, why do I want to go back to that point, right? Well, one of the things we know about the nervous system at that point is that it has a lot of potential. It's not fully, the pathways aren't fully defined. right? We don't even have an ego at that point. My goodness. It's very pluripotential, full of possibilities. Everything's sort of connected to everything else. And it hasn't kind of sorted out which connections it's going to use. But over time, the ones it uses get stronger, and the ones it doesn't use, in a sense, atrophy. So we go from being very full of possibilities, there like, 50 different pathways where we could have gotten from here to there, to one, two, like we really start narrowing it down. We go from a field of possibility to our favorite roads. And just like roads out in the world, the more we use them, the bigger they get, right? If you think about a road that you use a lot, if that road's busy, they make more lanes to it, right? And then it goes from a 2-lane to a 4-lane highway. And then if it's like really important road, we make it an expressway. And the nervous system does the same thing. It myelinates certain neurons that are very frequently used pathways so that nerve signals can transfer faster. And they become the go-to pathways, right? Go-to pathways. So this idea of returning to the day you were born is another way of saying returning to your natural range of possibilities before life experience and the way you met your life started culling them out. Do you understand what I mean? Before it started kind of narrowing down the field of things, because that happened through your life experience. That said, I will also point out you weren't born a blank slate either. It's not like you started out with no temperament or no genetic code or no epigenetically inherited traits or no intergenerational trauma. It's not like you started out, somehow rasa tabula, clear blank slate. But you did start out more flexible than you are right now. Another one of Tanoi Roshi's lines that comes to me is he used to say, the body of a baby is soft and pliable. The body of a corpse is stiff and rigid. You and I are somewhere in between. So that's part of what happens, right? When you were a little baby, like you had all this flexibility. But over time, certain pathways rigidify. Some of those physical habits become what we call posture. Habits of breathing, habits of walking, and the habits of foods and what. So the first, I'll call it sneaky thing that habits do that we're not really fully aware of, but it's good to take a look at now and then, is they limit possibilities. They start selecting certain pathways for us that we then become, or maybe always were, pretty unconscious of. It wasn't really clear to us we had a choice. It's just we do things this way. Right? Who sat down and taught you how to breathe as a kid? Who taught you how to crawl? You kind of figured out these habits yourself, right? And oftentimes, 40 years later, you go into body work and you realize, well, I've been doing that all wrong. I've been tensing the wrong muscles or whatever, right? We learn these things, but we didn't know. They're unconscious habits. So they limit possibilities. Let's take this a step further. There's an interesting book. You might want to pick it up if you're curious about this habit business, called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, that I read some time ago. And he really explores the cycle of habits. And the cycle, if you could picture this, is it starts out where habits are a routine. It's some kind of behavioral routine, or it could be a thought process or an emotional routine, but it's some kind of go-to routine. Like, when this happens, I do this. And I get some reward for doing that. There's some reason I've done that. And there develops a kind of craving for that reward or for that cycle. It becomes very comfortable. So this cycle of some kind of a cue triggers a routine that gives me a reward. So, it's 5 o'clock. I have a cocktail. It's called happy hour. I feel happy or whatever. So I get a cycle that starts driving that. Or, right. Or my cell phone goes off and, oh, I have a message. So I check my message and I feel a reward like, oh, I'm connected to this. I'm in the stream, right? So I could get a habit around how often I check the phone. There are much more insidious habits. For example, here's one from my childhood, conflict. Conflict, here's a cue, a trigger in your environment. People are fighting. Tempers have flared. The whole room feels electric. And you just don't know how high the ceiling is going to blow. What's your routine? What do you do? What I did as a kid is started walking on eggshells and learned to placate. I was trying to tap that down as much as I could. And what it gave me was a routine. I'll call it my walk on eggshell routine. That when conflict would emerge, that routine would pop out. And what was my reward for that? Well, it seemed to minimize as much as possible, or at least my experience of it as much as possible. It seemingly minimized the pain I felt in that conflict. That's what I thought it was doing anyway. I don't really know if it was, because you only get to live one timeline, right? But I thought that's what it was doing. So years later, conflict would break out and boom, right there is the walk on eggshell routine. I wasn't even aware of it. It's just what I did. I would get viscerally uncomfortable. Sometimes it would take my breath away, just like when I was a kid. At some point, I had to look at that because it was really getting in my way. And I'm sure it's one of the reasons I was drawn to martial arts, because I had to get some better training about, alternative routines for conflict, because this one was not very good. But we have these things. And one of the really sneaky parts of these loops is that the cue itself already triggers the craving. It already starts taking us down the pathway of jumping into that routine before we catch ourselves. Especially, we don't even catch ourselves when this is all unconscious. I wasn't aware of my walk on eggshell routine. I just knew I felt uncomfortable, so I did my thing. I didn't even know I had a thing. That's how unconscious it is. But it's just like the Pavlovian, Pavlov's dogs, that when there's the trigger, the cue around food, the saliva is already, forming and putting out the proteins to digest food. It's like our body jumps ahead and develops, it gets into its routine before we even know it. And that's, one way that advertising and marketing is so successful, right? Put on something that triggers us a certain way. Oh, people are they're happy. Oh, they're at a resort. I want to go to a resort. It triggers a result in us, or it's a habit of mind that we're not even really aware of. It's all operating under the waterline of consciousness. But we all have them. We all have them. So part of the sneaky work of habits, and that my eggshell example is one in my own life, is that they hold or bring the past into the present. They store and carry and embody a history of our lived experience that's right below the waterline, or maybe deep below the waterline of consciousness, so that we end up acting out of reasons that even we don't really understand. We get triggered by somebody in a conflict, and we're right back being a little kid who thinks that her only option is to placate. Not a fully resourced adult who actually has language and words, empathy and influencing skills. We forget all that, right? We're right back to being 3 years old again. And we don't even realize that's what's going on. That's what's so tricky about it. But that's what's going on. It has a way of freezing us in a past and then bringing that into the present. And that's why sometimes when we get triggered, we can get such what I'll call outsized reactions to things, wholly out of proportion to what is really the seriousness of what's going on. And this often comes out with family members or loved ones or some of those relationships that are nearest and dearest to us. Somebody says something and it's like, wow, we get triggered. It's called triggered. Well, what trigger means is it's triggering a routine. It's triggering a habit of emotional response that is deep and old, deep and old. And boom, out it comes. The other person who's had a different set of life experiences and may not have those same habits of mind can be completely nonplussed by our reaction. But there it is now in the relationship. And if we don't understand it, we can't explain it. And sometimes these things just escalate because what's your habit in conflict? Maybe yours is to fight. Maybe the other is just to placate. Maybe somebody else is to just go away. But most of us do develop something we do. This is something we play with a lot in Zen leader training, especially in Zen leader 2, when we in particular look at fears and these kind of triggers, because they have a way of creating repeating themes in our life. These habits don't just show up in our body. We start to manifest them in our relationships, in our life choices. They start showing up in our world. So when you can pick it out, like in your relationships, there's people will often say, like in a work situation, there's always that person at work I can't get along with. Well, that person at work you can't get along with probably represents somebody who's triggering you in a very specific way. I hate it. I hate people who are arrogant, or I hate it when people are XYZ. I don't like that kind of a person. Because it's setting off a loop in us. And it's always, it's interesting to look at that. Let me just give you a few examples. And if you have something to write with, do you have something to write with? It'd be good if you grabbed a piece of paper, just a little note or a journal or a pen, because I want you to write the first thing that comes to mind. Not overthink this, because I'm just going to give you a little scenario, like a vignette. And I want you to write, what's your go-to routine? And let's just see what you have. I'm not going to call you out on it or anything like that, but I just want to see what happens for you. Okay. So first thing that comes to mind, you've been insulted. What do you do? You've been insulted. What do you do? Just write it down. Next one. You arrive at a party. What do you do? You arrive at a party. What do you do? Next one. So you don't get, I'm not going to give you time to overthink this. Right? Next one. You've been called out for making a mistake. You have been called out on making a mistake. What do you do? And the doing, maybe where do you think? What do you feel? It could be a habit of mind, habit of emotion. What goes on for you? Next one. Someone cuts you off on the freeway. What do you do? Instant reaction. What is it? Final one, fifth one. You've been excluded. Shut out. What do you do? So now let me just ask you, I read you 5 little scenarios and I asked you what you do. How many of you could find answers for at least 4 of them? Just show of hands, could find some answer of something you characteristically do for at least 4 of them. Yeah, sure. Now, if we really think about the messages and the trainings of Zen, don't let the mind stop, fall on fast moving waters, meet each moment as it happens, be in the here and now, right here now, be in the moment. The true answer to any of these could be, it depends. But that's not our answer. We usually have some go-to responses. And I don't say this to embarrass you or make you feel bad or anything, just to point out how human it is, how human it is. And sometimes these are outward visible behaviors. Sometimes it's just a little loop we go through in our mind. Sometimes they're emotional reactions, but these are habits as well. Habits that are doing inner work on us because they set off cycles within cycles, and everything's a chain reaction. It's going to lead to something else. And here's where we get to the real sneaky work of habits, the third real sneaky work of habits. Remember, the first sneaky thing it does is it can limit our possibilities. The second sneaky thing habits do is they can bring the past into the present. The third sneaky thing, and this is real sneaky, is we identify with them. We create an I out of them. We think that's who I am. I knows itself by these habits. Because the I is, I want to call it, it's like a holographic assemblage of elements. It doesn't actually exist. It's a relational set of elements. And what relates it are all the things it identifies with. My name is Ginny. It's part of my identity, right? I have a walk on eggshell routine. It's part of my identity. I would never consciously say that, but that's what the ego does. So these unconscious habits can be wildly uncomfortable and stressful and cause us endless grief, and we can still be reluctant to let go of them because it feels like life and death. It's an existential thing. I hangs on to what I thinks it is. So even if I suck, if I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough, you'd think we would be so happy to let go of that stuff. And ultimately, we are really happy to let go of it if we can really process it and work through and blah, 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 blah. But initially, it's so uncomfortable to let go of it, I won't go there because it's comfortable. It's at least it's familiar. Even if it makes me really unhappy, it's so familiar. It's like well-worn shoes. Even if the shoes are worn in ways that throw my posture off, those are my shoes. They're comfortable on my feet, right? You see how insidious it is. This actually brings to mind another thing Tanoi Roshi used to do. He used to throw people's shoes out. He said, look at the soles of the shoes. And he'd see how distorted the shoe he was by how their weight landed in the soles. And over time, it would get all distorted. Say, you need a new pair of shoes. And don't wreck them that way. You can see our habits, as I say, don't just show up in our body, they show up in our world. The habits of how we walk are going to show up in our shoes. So I is going to use anything to define itself. because it's a desperate little thing, you know. Because it doesn't actually exist, it'll take anything as part of its identity. They're like mooring lines. You've heard me describe it that way. And again, this is very unconscious. In other talks, you've heard me describe it like drawing from the endless buffet table of life. Eye has its preferences for what it draws. You know, I'll draw from the I'm not good enough plate because that's part of who I am. And I'll draw from this and I'll draw from that. I'll draw from this. I'll draw from that. And I get a plate of food that is remarkably similar, trip after trip after trip after trip after trip. I have habitual choices, right? But I like those foods. I like those very good. You know, they're very familiar. Comfort foods, even if they make me really unhappy. It's like, go figure, but that's what we do. So, so this is just about being human. You know, it's not a judgment, but when we can see it, we start to get a very special power over it, because we can start to see it and then see through it. When we can't see it, it gets power over us, because those patterns will kick off unconsciously without interception. But when we see it, the eye that sees it is not itself trapped by the habit. This is this perspective, sometimes called a witness perspective in meditation and, you know, mindfulness training and things, is a way of seeing our mind and seeing our habits of thought and seeing what we do and seeing when we get triggered. So we're not just the trigger, we're the self that sees the trigger. And when we can unpeel from just the raw subjective experience of it, we get some perspective. And we can start to remind ourselves, you know, I'm a full-grown woman now. I am not 3 years old. I actually have a lot of resources for dealing with conflict. In fact, after, you know, all the conflict I faced in my life, you could actually say I'm probably an expert. So I probably can face this situation without running away. Wow. So we can start to make different choices. We can start to make different choices. So how can this guide us in this time? Here you are in the 90-day, we call it habit of freedom. How can we play with habits in a way that refresh or invite freedom into our possibilities? In one way is to build a habit of zazen. And when I talk again later in February, I'll talk about how zazen works to be a habit that breaks habits. So I'll dig more into that next time. But another way that we can use this time is you were encouraged to think of some other habit, you know, besides zazen, that you wanted to play with or experiment with. And maybe there's another line of the training you wanted to build out, you know, or maybe there's something you are kind of chewing on. But I would invite you to think about maybe one of these triggers or reactions that doesn't really serve you anymore, that you'd like to refresh, be fresh, be free of, get perspective on, have choice around. Be able to look again from the fully resourced person you are today, not from the person you were when that habit formed, when those first connections were being made. So there may be a habit you could pick of something you do. Maybe it's even one of those 5 things we talked about earlier, one of those go-to routines that really doesn't serve, doesn't make you happy. It doesn't make you fulfill your aspirations. It doesn't give you joy. It doesn't let you create. It doesn't beautify your life. Maybe there's one habit of emotional reaction or thought or whatever that you say, you know, I want to build awareness of that. I want to know what triggers it. I want to probe what I'm getting out of it. What's my reward? What craving is feeding this? And the way you replace habit is not with good intention, it's with a new routine. It's a new habit. We replace the routine. So in place of whatever I used to do, say my walk on eggshell habit, I'm going to do something else. My new habit is I'm going to take a deep heart up breath and I'm going to enter. I'm going to relax, center, and enter. Whoa, that's a real different routine than my old one. But it's brought me so much more joy. That's an example of just how we could intercept a habit of thought or a habit of mind or a habit of emotional reaction that's not making us happy, and see what triggers it. What's our go-to response? What are we getting out of that I has identified with, no matter how uncomfortable it is, and built some craving around, at least I know who I am. How could we supplant that routine with something that's more life-giving, that frees us up? What would be a new routine that we'd like to experiment with? Put that into these 90 days. See what happens. See what happens. So a habit that doesn't serve, that you'd like to refresh, what cues it? What's the cue that triggers it, that gets it running? What might you change it out for? And expect some resistance. Expect that the first couple of times you try an alternate response, I protests. That's because it won't feel comfortable. What does comfort mean? It means I've done it before. That's all comfort means, right? So if I'm trying a new routine, it's not going to feel comfortable. It's not going to feel like an old pair of shoes. That's the point. In some ways, that's one reason we willingly make ourselves so uncomfortable in Zen training. Because when you're making yourself uncomfortable, you are forcing new pathways to form, or atrophied pathways to strengthen. It could be another way to look at it. You're reclaiming some of those possibilities of your youth before life shuts some doors, or you engaging with life shut some doors, right? The formation of habits is a really essential function in the nervous system because it's efficient, it saves energy. So it's not like, oh, I want a nervous system that never builds habits. We go nuts, right? If we had to think everything through all the time, that'd be a very inefficient processing system. And the habits that we have in there, it'd be nice if they built the life we want to live, not a life we don't want to live. It's so obvious, but until we look at it, we can miss it. Let your habits build the life you want to live, a life you want to share with others, the life you want to bring to the world. So expect it will meet with resistance, and expect it will take several weeks to establish new connections, because that's how long it takes for the nervous system to lay down new pathways or reclaim old unused roads that weren't your go-to for some years. So as new connections are made, we have to be gentle with ourselves, patient with that process, and willing to face into and understand the very human and natural resistance that will arise. And all the excuses it'll start to put in our head, like why this is a waste of time, and just go back to the way it was. Wait, catch that in the act. Catch that in the act. So let me pause here and just ask, anything you'd like to comment on or add to or ask about? Thing that comes up for you as you hear this? Any questions? So if I were to recap the sneaky work of habits, the first sneak is it limits possibility. The second sneak is it keeps us stuck in the past. And the third sneak is that ego takes it as an identity. Not its full identity, but it draws identity from it. So it's reluctant to let go, even of things that don't serve. And Kelly, I see you were mentioning in the chat the cognitive dissonance that enables us to keep habits. Isn't it something how we can do that? But we do. But we do. One of the things I've learned is anything I don't look at, I'm going to trip over sooner or later, including these kind of habits that may not serve. Anything I'm not willing to look at, I will sooner or later trip over. And some of the cognitive dissonance that Kelly points to is what holds those bumps in the carpet in place, you know, that somehow we just let them be. We just let them be. Yeah. So how's the first week of, yeah, Dave, go ahead.
You would always try to establish new habits in my playing. And he would say, you can't get rid of a habit by thinking about it. And then you replace old habit with a new habit, like you said. And then old habits die from lack of use.
There you go. There you go. That's a great summary of it, Dave. Thank you. It's just, again, I think of roads in the real world, that when you want a new highway, you lay down a new highway, you replace an old highway with a new highway, right? And then the old way can fall into disuse over time. You know, think about the roads in your hometown that expressways replaced, those old roads, and sometimes sort of fall into disuse. So again, it's our nervous system is a little bit like Facebook or what Meta, you know, that it gets stronger with likes, you know, and what doesn't resonate dies out. So the old habits can fall into disuse. They don't ever go away entirely, but they don't have to either. You know, they don't have to. We can, you know, the true human body is the whole universe. We can hold all of it, but they don't have to grab us. They don't have to. You know, this is the big point that Duhigg makes in his book. The cover of his book shows a little hamster running around a hamster cage. Can you picture that? Like a hamster paddling through the cage. And that's how we are when habits are unconscious. And then the flip of that is the hamsters running on the outside of the cage. Right? When you picture that, it's kind of fun, right? The hamsters on the outside of the cage. So we can use what we know about how the nervous system works to our advantage when we want to build mastery. But when we're unconsciously stuck in habits, we're on the inside of the cage. Right? We're the little hamster inside the wheel where the habit runs us. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Anyone else have a piece of wisdom to contribute to this puzzle? Yeah, or a question? Yeah, go ahead, Edwin.
I'm just thinking about conflict avoidance at work. And I guess I'm sort of thinking out loud here, but you know, what you're describing by trying something new is you're taking a risk. You're entering into an encounter which is like, you know, could be uncomfortable. And it may be that what you're trying won't work, but I guess you won't know unless you try. Maybe that's the point. That if we're bound by our fear and we never venture out of that comfort zone, whether or not it works is, and I'm not even sure what I mean by work, but difficult relationships. You know, if you don't try different things, I guess then you're just stuck. So, but there is that genuine fear of, I'm entering into something that's going to be deeply uncomfortable. And it's going to be not only uncomfortable for me, but I suspect it may be uncomfortable for the person who I'm having trouble with. And so you do have that, that is real. There's no way to massage that away. It's gonna, it could be very uncomfortable, but it's the risk you take, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, in a difficult conflicted situation where it's going to be uncomfortable by definition. The question is, do we want it to be productive uncomfortable or unproductive uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And here's, I liked your emphasis on the word stuck, because if we're stuck on a certain way of being in that, then we're not actually meeting the moment. We're not with the person in this moment, this situation. We're acting out of our conflict habit, whatever that is, right? That was formed from the past. And you heard me talk about replacing a conflict routine with something like center, enter, add value. Or if my go-to response is to center myself, breathe, and be there for the other person, somehow, how can I enter and be there for the other person? Something's going to happen. It's going to be uncomfortable, Edwin, as you said. I'm not going to make this rose-colored glasses, but I'm meeting the moment. And what that says is that something creative can happen. Something is possible when we meet the moment with just that pure awareness and intent to do the best we can. Even when we're clumsy, when that intent is there, it can carry something. The energy is stronger than technique, as we say, ki before ma'ai. The energy, so can I sincerely in that moment be for that person, be for them, center myself, enter that moment, and do the best I can for them. Then even if I'm a little clumsy and sloppy because I didn't rehearse what I was going to say or any of that, and I'm tripping over my words, that purity of intent is going to help. But you're right. Anytime we try something new, it's going to be uncomfortable. So that's where breath, hara, centering is so useful, because last time I checked, we're kind of in a practice of how to let ourselves be uncomfortable.
I think that was the follow on I just wanted to say, is that it's just the notion that life isn't always comfortable, and that's just the way it is.
And that's how it is. Yeah.
So thank you, Roshi.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Bob.
Hey, Jenny. As you were talking, I think a thought came to my mind about the idea that the origins of habit tend to are actually quite useful. Like habits were probably emerged because of a usefulness, a coping mechanism, a trauma, a response that got us through. And at that moment in time, they were, almost a coping mechanism, a healing, right? A something that that oftentimes through our stages of development we grew out of. We healed. We healed, and yet almost like scar tissue in the body, right? Scar tissue in the body is meant to heal a wound, but it sort of outlasts its welcome. It stays beyond the healing, and habits sort of feel like that to me. That's something that sort of lasted beyond its usefulness.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the process is sort of, as you say, recognizing that it exists, so it's separate from the I, thanking it for its usefulness at the time, and sort of being able to recognize that this is no longer necessary.
That's right.
I think there's a healing there, a recognition that healing had happened, and then moving beyond and sort of saying thank you, and I no longer need you.
There you go. Thank you. I no longer need you. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, the truth is we grow up, and the consciousness that we had when we formed those habits was pretty immature and almost certainly pre-rational. So we have a lot of habits that in the light of day make no sense. So we have to give them the light of day. We have to give them the light of day. So I really appreciate the gentleness that you expressed there, Bob. Thank you. No longer needed here. Yeah. Be gentle with yourself. See, we want to be gentle with ourselves so we can do really tough work. You know, it's like to control yourself into doing really tough work. Any other questions or comments or things to add? Yeah. Yeah, Jasleen.
Jocelyn is calling from work. So that's why the mask. I have always been very curious to know one thing, and I did not resonate with it. So now I want to bring it to you, that all these, the life coaches or the self-help books, mainly like, Robin Sharma and Tony Robbins and all, they advocate removing the things and building a habit on. For example, he says every day I just wear a black shirt, so I don't think. In my closet I have nothing but the black shirt. Or there would be a thing on, I always pick up the third thing on the menu, and I don't care what it is, so that my brain doesn't have to think. So I just built a habit so my brain doesn't have to think, and then it goes into the subconscious mind. But for me, it did not resonate because I love the colors of life. I want to, I love the energy of the day. If today blue is calling me, I should be aligned with that rather than just, no, it's only black that I wear, because that just feels that I am killing a piece of me that wants to live. And I wonder, why would somebody who writes so many books advocates that they meditate, and then still don't have that understanding that you are sending people in a wrong direction. So I just want to bring it to the
Bring it to the
express.
fore. Bring it to the fore. You know, well, I think what is being pointed toward is that efficiency, that I mentioned earlier, that habits create a certain kind of efficiency. So if somebody deeply values efficiency, maybe they are willing to trade that off. One of the things that I value more than efficiency is aliveness. And we say in Zen, don't let the mind stop. And that doesn't mean, I mean, that's kind of a funny phrase, but it's really opened up for me to say, the point where the way Jasleen's energy meets this moment is where the magic happens. It's where everything happens. And if I meet it like a robot, third item on the menu, black shirt in the closet, if I meet it like a robot, I'm not matching life. I'm not matching the energy of my surrounds. I'm matching a program. So it might be a very efficient program, and maybe I had to do that. Maybe this is one of those habits because I didn't have enough energy as a kid. So I built a habit of conserving energy, and then I thought it was the answer for all people for all time. Who knows where that came from? But it's so clear to me. And in fact, I was just writing about this in the article I put in Forbes this month. It's not just clear to me, it really comes out of a quantum physics understanding of reality, that it's how our consciousness interacts with the situation that makes something so. The observer is not separate. We are co-creating what is observed. We're co-creating with that. And so it really points to the importance of, I want to say meeting the moment. We say in Zen, be here now, but what does it mean to be here now? Well, it means to be in our senses rather than lost in thought. Because if we're lost in thought, we're lost in habitual thought, habits of thought, neurotic thought, looping thought that reflects certain patterns and go-to places that our mind goes, that are generally pulling us out of engagement with the here and now. So to be in the moment, we mean our senses are engaged. I'm actually registering and vibrating with the energies of the field. I'm actually able to interact in some way that is a sort of dance with the universe. That dance is what Fudochi points toward. That's what it means, the mind that doesn't stop. That's dance means, right? So efficiency is useful, but it's not an ultimate truth, for goodness sake, right? Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you so much. It makes so much sense because I've been having this issue whenever I work with the young adults that, they read these books and the time where they need to be alive, they start focusing on letting go of the things that they are going to let go of eventually and get hard like a corp, right? So at the time when they have the space to try different things, to try different color, to try different activities, they say no, success is everything. So the part of success, efficiency, but being alive, that's the balance that needs to be there rather than only focusing on one thing. It was difficult for me to explain, and now I think I got it, so I'm gonna use that.
Wonderful. Good.
Thank you.
So are we ready to call it a night? Are you good? Oh, Heather, Scobie Roshi.
I found that last question really interesting. I think I can relate to the spontaneity part. Like that's always been maybe me from when I was little. But the thing, and what I know about you, Roshi, is that you're a pretty disciplined person. Like I remember when we were in Chozenji, like every morning you wake up and you do the exercises that you teach everyone. And so I struggle with basically that discipline to some extent, that I'm often kind of reacting to the moment and doing what comes naturally to me then. But I wonder if you can talk about that balance between these discipline, building the discipline of good habits versus that natural reaction to the moment and kind of going with the flow. Does the question make sense?
Yeah, your question is great. A great question. This is a great thing to explore in your own experience in this time too. I mean, because I think I don't think there's just one size fits all. I will say for this body, for this being, we talk about this in terms of 4 different kinds of energy patterns in Zen leader programs. So, driver and organizer, collaborator, visionary, patterns that operate, large scale patterns in our nervous system. And so for me, organizer is a real familiar pattern for me. Discipline is very, it's very available to me. And so when I find disciplines that make me feel good, I tend to stick with them. So if I really I keep my morning routine keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger because I keep learning these new exercises. And I go, oh, that felt good. I'm going to do that tomorrow. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. So now I'm doing the breathing exercises, and then
It went from the Zen 10 to the Zen 50.
Yeah, I'm not. That's right. Followed by Okyo. Followed by. So, now, do I lose spontaneity in that? Yeah, I do. Is it a worthwhile trade for me because of how it sets my day and it lets me be creative in other work? Yeah, it does. Is it something I should keep looking at? Yeah, I should. So all are true. The discipline has really served me. It's a case of habits that have really helped my body be more conditioned now than when I was in my 30s, right? So there's something I really value in that, and I still would consciously choose. And are there certain mornings when that's not the appropriate thing to do, that something else is called for? Absolutely. So I think the beauty of I think the fuel for discipline that really serves us is when we have an inherent resonance or passion for something that we just want to master. We want to get better at this, and something's fueling us that says, I want to keep doing this. it somehow matches us, and we feel into wanting that to be something we build, something we can grow. What we know about building things like the organizer pattern is doing almost anything repetitively is going to strengthen the organizer. You know, it's going to help us build the discipline, or the muscle of discipline, you know. And if what we're doing is something that we really care about, it really fits us, then the reward we get for doing it keeps fueling another cycle. So it doesn't become such a like, you know, cracking the whip on ourselves or something, you know, or finger wagging at ourselves. It becomes something that's fueled by how it matches this instrument, you as an instrument. So, you know, I don't want to even propose that there's a one size answer to your question, Scobie Roshi, because I would say that we have to find the practices that stretch us enough that we're uncomfortable, because that's how we learn, that's how we know we're learning, and are comfortable enough that we'll actually do them, that we'll stick with them, you know, if we want to build a habit around them, you know, an intentional habit. So we better care about them or love them in some way. They have to, again, kind of resonate with us. Good. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for contributing to this this talk and contributing your attention. I encourage you to look at a habit that is worth maybe shifting or replacing a routine on, that would bring greater joy and refresh into this 90 days for you. Be gentle with yourself, but clear. Gentle but clear. and good luck. Good luck. We're here together, holding this this special place of practice together, and we'll be all the stronger for it. So thank you.